Have you ever heard of direct index investing? Is this a gimmick, or does direct indexing offer benefits for investors? Keep listening as we dive in. Welcome to the Money Meets Medicine podcast, where we talk all about the personal finance topics you wish you had learned in medical school. I'm your host, Justin Harvey, and here is your co-host, who now is the proud dad of a Silver Classic soccer player and an all-star baseball player, Dr. Jimmy Turner.
Yeah, man, this was it's a little bit ago now. It's been a couple weeks, but it was a big week in the Turner household. So my oldest, our sports journey has been hilarious. So Kristen and I both played soccer in college. Small Division II school. Don't get too excited. I wasn't playing it like Wake. Regardless, we both played soccer in college. It's how we met. And naturally, we have kids, and we're like, oh, our kids are going to play soccer, right? Like at some level. And our oldest tried it and stopped. My son has two left feet, and not in a good way. Like he's not meant to play soccer. And then my youngest, she was playing. The last event that she had in the soccer career was playing in goal at the age of 6. And the Kona ice truck pulled up, the shaved ice truck. And she literally ran off the field in the middle of the game to go get, her Kona ice. And so we just kind of felt like, hey, it's just not in the cards. Our kids aren't going to play soccer. And then Grace, my oldest, a couple of years ago, decided that she wanted to pick it back up, and she's worked really hard at it, and so she's playing travel ball now, and decided to try out for a team, and made a Silver Classic team for where we are. And Wesley started playing baseball and fell in love with it, made the all-star team in his very first year, which was pretty crazy. So it's been a busy sporting event. We're learning all about travel baseball. And Justin, if you're not familiar with travel soccer and travel baseball, it consumes your entire life. I mean, it's intense. You have any experience with that?
We have some friends whose kids are a little further down the youth sports conveyor belt than ours are. And I have observed that it looks like a lot of fun and a total life reorientation in ways that you can't really understand until you're in it. So yeah, I'm one part looking forward to it, one part trying to relish all the free time that I have right now.
Yeah, I don't think I appreciated that as much when they were younger. But I will say I've waited 38 years to get to this point of parenting, where my kid really wants to be good at something. So Grace, soccer and flute. She's an amazing flautist. I don't know how to say that. She's a flute player. It's a flautist. And Wesley's really taken to baseball. And so I get to just totally pour into that. I come home and I get to, go throw the ball in the backyard or go get some touches in with Grace and that sort of thing. And so it's been really rewarding. But yeah, first experience with that. And speaking of first experiences, actually, the direct indexing, I ran into this in an interesting way. So back in my days of when I was co-founding a venture capital backed startup, for those that are new to the audience, I did that for about a year, and really cool idea. Didn't pan out, for a variety of reasons. But one of the things that we were going to bring into the platform before the company ended up having to be shut down was direct indexing, potentially through, this investment software that we had partnered with. And it was the first time I really ran into it. And of course, they sent all these white papers and kind of interesting things. And I am a simple person. I try to keep most of the things in my life simple. And so it didn't make a lot of sense to me, to be honest with you. At the time, I was like, I'm a low cost, diversified index fund sort of investor. Direct indexing seemed much more active to me. And so, yeah, I'll be honest. The first time I ran into this, I was not a fan at all. But on this show, Justin, we're going to talk about maybe why, it's a good idea, maybe why it's not such a good idea. And I know, Justin, you are a fan of direct indexing, so we're gonna dive into it. But before we get there, don't forget, if you are a longtime listener of the show, disability insurance, we're gonna talk about this in a couple of weeks, but July is the time of year. If you're leaving training, you only have 30 to 60 days, sometimes 90 days to take access to the guaranteed standard issue policy that is going away. So this is the time of the year where you have to secure disability insurance. If you're up and coming, you just finished training, this is the time of the year that your income's potentially going up. You need to consider getting more coverage, which hopefully you purchase that option through your disability insurance coverage and training. All that to say, if you need help with anything disability insurance related, you can get that at moneymeetsmedicine.com/disability, or shoot me an email, jimmy@moneymeetsmedicine.com. Happy to answer any questions you have. Look at to see if there's a GSI program where you are, or to provide any other help you might need with disability insurance. Justin, I know you're a fan, direct indexing. So maybe I should let you talk through this, since you're the financial planner and you have actual experience with this, and it's not just theoretical stuff like what I have experience with.
Sure. I'm glad to kick things off. Direct indexing, you say I'm a fan, and I am a fan, but it's a tool. So it requires the right context, the right opportunity, the right client, the right circumstances. So this isn't right for everyone. But there are a lot of people who should consider it who right now are using a different approach, especially like the folks who are, Jimmy, calling you up and saying like, hey, all my doctor friends are doing XYZ and there's this like illiquid, opaque, high fee thing. Should I do it? Like, well, have you already considered something like what we're going to talk about today, the direct indexing approach? And direct indexing, by the way, is a bit of a misnomer because it's not indexing per se. An index is just an artificial list of companies created by media publications in order to report on them. So the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, and a bunch of others are owned. It's a proprietary list owned by media companies. So to call it direct indexing is a little bit inaccurate. When rightly done, we're investing in a full stock universe, meaning stocks of a certain type. Now, the S&P 500, for example, is large cap, so companies above 10 billion market cap, domestic stocks. So it's a large cap blend stock universe, we might call it. But if you're investing in a large cap domestic stock universe, you're actually investing in other companies besides the S&P 500. So when I'm investing in large cap US domestic, I'm usually buying like 650 companies through my institutional partner for my clients. So the S&P 500, for example, is not exhaustive, but this is nice because the way that you structure your asset allocation is not beholden to just buying an index ETF. So, Jimmy, you said you come from a low cost, diversified, buy the ETF and call it good, which frankly, you're probably beating 9 out of 10 other investors if you're doing that. So that's good. Direct indexing is just I'll call it like one notch more sophisticated in the approach with really the same ethos. So we're still trying to be broadly diversified. We're still trying to own, global equities at roughly market cap weights. Maybe we're doing some factor tilts. And I partner with dimensional funds for a lot of my clients. So we're looking at value, a little bit more value than growth. We're looking at a little bit more small cap rather than large cap. But in general, if you look at all the holdings in one of these accounts, we're still very, very broadly invested. But the nice thing about it, the reason this is special is instead of buying that one ticker, that IVV or that SPY, for example, which is the S&P 500, we're buying all of the 642 companies in the United States, the individual stocks in one account registration, meaning if I have a joint account with my spouse or an account titled in the name of a revocable trust, it's a taxable account. And it's important to note, this is a strategy best implemented in a taxable account because a lot of the secret sauce is tax advantage that is not able to be manifest in a 401k or an IRA. But when this strategy is run in a taxable account, you're buying all 642 tickers. And then the manager, whom you're paying a fee similar to an expense ratio on an ETF. Although if you're buying IVV, that might be, 3 basis points. So 0.03%. If you're running one of these direct indexing strategies, you're probably paying 20, 30, 40 basis points. But the tax advantage of running this type of strategy through the tax loss harvesting, the appreciated security gifting, and the potential down the line for a step up in basis if you bequeath this to your heirs. There's a lot of sort of tax preference that can be leveraged for the investor. It tends to, in my observation and research, significantly exceed the expense ratio of these types of strategies.
I think that's something that we come back to multiple times on the show. Actually, I was just editing a recent episode this morning before hopping on here. And given the day, right? Finance is pretty simple. You're going to pay something for a service, a product, whatever. And the question is, what is the return on your investment? Right. So when we talk costs and people hear like 30 or 40 basis points, if you live in like the index fund atmosphere, then you're going to look at that and be like, wait, hold on. So I'm paying 0.4% instead of 0.03%. And all of a sudden your head explodes. And we're now in the world where this doesn't make sense. And these are all the things that people don't, talk about and say you should never do. Like active management, it's, 1% expense ratio. That's why you do index fund, because it's a tenth of that. So if you're hearing this, the question isn't like the cost by itself. Like in a vacuum, keeping your costs down is almost always a good thing, right? But outside of a vacuum, and when those costs involve services and features that could potentially benefit you, the question really is the cost overcome by the benefit that you receive? And so if this is a completely new world to you, don't run away, because you just heard, Justin, you just mentioned the 40 basis points. This is a really interesting thing. And I think it's worth considering whether you end up on the side of being a fan of direct indexing or not. You should know that it exists. And so hopefully this will help kind of zero in on that. This is also a really growing trend. So, I was looking at some numbers, and back in 2021, they projected that so in 2021, there was about $350 billion that was direct indexing assets being managed. And then in 2024, they projected it to be $450 billion. And this is actually really interesting because now we're in 2024, right? So we found out that at the end of 2022, it actually ended up being 450 billion, and that now they're projecting 800 billion by the year of 2026. And so this is a trend that you're going to hear more about, right? If you haven't been exposed to direct indexing already, this is something that you're going to hear more about. And I do think it is worth emphasizing, Justin, that even though the S&P 500 and Dow Jones, those are kind of made up nomers for, a bucket of stocks, direct indexing can be shaped in the same way should you choose. And so you can have what looks exactly like an S&P 500 fund if you want, that has the same 500 companies. But now the benefit, and this is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but now the benefit is instead of having that one ETF that may go up or down as a conglomerate of stocks, as a basket of stocks, you now can pick and choose the winners and losers and then do some pretty tax advantageous things with them. So you're still investing in the same stuff. You still have all 500 funds if you want them. But now the ones that are at the top that have been crushing it, right, you can do one thing with, and the ones that are bottom that are, bottom dwellers that are, going to fall out of the S&P 500 because they've done so bad, you can also do some stuff with that. And so it, in my opinion, allows you to take just this giant forest, and it allows you to then look at the individual trees to see which ones are growing and which ones need to be cut down. Is that a good way to look at it?
And it gives you a lot of flexibility within the index. So even if you like the 504 companies listed on the S&P 500, there's a couple, maybe it is a market cap weighted index, meaning the bigger a company is, the bigger percentage it is. So if like NVIDIA and Microsoft and Apple might make up like a quarter of your net worth eventually if things keep going the way they're going. That may or may not be good. So a manager has a specific mandate within a stock universe is going to be able to customize those weights. One of the things that I like doing for my clients. And in addition, you can avoid things like what's called the reconstitution effect, which we may have talked about in the past. But one of the downfalls, there's a lot of amazing things about index investing. One of the downfalls of index investing is if you're an index fund, you've got to hold the index, which means whenever a new listing is added or removed, you need to add it or remove it at the same time as all of your friends who are also running the exact same strategy. So, Jimmy, do you remember what it was like trying to buy toilet paper during COVID? Whenever the supply chain hammer was coming down, and turns out everyone else wanted to buy toilet paper too. And you better hope like you have a bidet installed. There's obviously like US large cap stocks are very liquid. So it's not like you can't sell it, but there is a premium associated with a transaction if you're doing something at the same time as everyone else. So using an SMA strategy, and this is one of these areas, like it's not like a 10% differential, but it does make a handful of basis points difference if you're able to recalibrate your strategy on your terms, giving the manager leeway to transact whenever the spread is narrower, meaning the premium is smaller to buy and sell certain securities. That's one specific example of an advantage of the SMA approach. And in aggregate over time, this is a really good thing for the investor.
So as to not leave anybody behind, an SMA is a separately managed account, which is another name for a direct indexing strategy.
Yeah, it's a name that I like a little bit better.
Yeah, SMA is.
Thank you for de-jargoning me.
Yeah, that's what I'm here for. I'm here just to bring you back down to the normal person's financial knowledge base. So actually, I hope that's not true since I've been podcasting about personal finance for like 7 years. But yeah, so this is increasing, right? It's going to be a massive part, separately managed account, SMA. And, as part of that, there's a natural question, right? The question that we talked about earlier, the return on your investment for the cost that it produces. And so, like from a pros and cons standpoint, Justin, you just mentioned one of them in terms of, the premium being lower when you're transacting on your sales. The one that got me tuned into bringing this as a topic for the show is something that we talked about previously, which is donor advised funds. And, if you've got a DAF, DAF, what is your preferred term on that? Is it DAF, DAF, or is it donor advised fund?
I use them all interchangeably.
Okay. All right. Let's call it a DAF because it makes me sound cool. I feel cool when I say that. So with a DAF, I learned very quickly in creating my own, there's that thing called spec ID, which is where you can take that bucket of, let's say my ETF that I've had for the longest amount of time that's, potentially lost the most amount of money. And I can individually target that one fund, right? That spec ID, let's call it SMAs, right? So SMAs are like that, like a spec ID on steroids, where now you're not just picking the longest held fund that has, gained the most to donate those appreciated shares. You can now target the individual stocks that, the Apples, the Nvidias, as you just described, that have gone up and gone bonkers. Take your gains that you've appreciated there and individually target those to then give that money to someone else, charitable organization that you care about. And the same can be said for the tax loss harvesting side. When Tesla decided to lose its mind and go down significantly, that would have been a great opportunity if you held a significant portion of that stock as part of your portfolio to then tax loss harvest, carry that forward for all of the benefits we've talked previously on the show, right? So it does allow you to take that spec ID approach where you're taking a specific lot of investments and really just magnifying the glass and be able to pick from a nitty gritty granular detail.
That's right. And to take an extreme example, just to illustrate the point, imagine you have $500,000 invested in an SMA, a separately managed account, and it's invested in the S&P 500, like a pro rata. You're holding every company in the weight that exists in the index. And then you do that on January 1, and on December 31st, it grows from 500 to $1 million. And what we've seen in the last year and a half is they call them the Magnificent Seven in financial media, which is, the FANG stocks plus NVIDIA and maybe one other. And so it's mega cap tech that's running away with the index. If we take a more extreme example, say it's all NVIDIA, like the $500,000 of gains is all one stock. The other 503 stocks have just bounced sideways, which is kind of a more extreme example of what really did happen. So it's at the end of the year, your account's worth $1 million and you want to give away all of your gains, say. If you hold a separately managed account where you have that NVIDIA stock that you bought for $8,000 and now it's worth $508,000, you can give away those shares, and all of that whole $500,000 is removed from your estate because it's so concentrated in that one position or in a handful of positions which you could give away. And by the way, if you're adding cash ongoing, every year you're adding, another $500,000, you could just rebuy it in a somewhat short period of time. If you pay attention to the wash sale rules, you got to give it a month, but you can buy back in and very efficiently not pay any taxes on that money and accomplish your charitable goals at the same time. If we compare that to you hold SPY, you buy 500, it grows to $1 million, which is great. We just made $500,000. Now you want to give away $500,000. The best you can do is give away shares that have appreciated 50%. Because it's all the gains are embedded in that one ETF, and you can't segment out all of the gains specifically. So you can make a $500,000 gift, but what remains is $500,000 of basis and $500,000 of gains. So you've given away a lot of basis, meaning the basis is like what you want to keep. You give away low basis, which you can do in the NVIDIA example. In the IVV example, you now have $500,000 on December 31st. You got $500,000 left. You gave away $500,000. And if you liquidated everything that's left over, you got $250,000 of taxable gains that you're going to pay tax on. Whereas in the SMA example, if you liquidate everything that's left over, there's basically no tax impact because it's all basis that you're selling because you gave away the gains. It gives you that specific capability that allows for a more sophisticated gifting approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're throwing out lots of words on this episode, Justin. So FANG, right? So was that Facebook, Apple, Amazon,
Google?
I was gonna say NVIDIA because how well it's done.
It's the new one. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but I guess you could just add the extra. So FANG has two A's. Now you can add two N's.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, exactly. But so it allows you to take that approach down to the granular level, pick up the NVIDIA gains, and then donate those charitably. While maintaining your basis, and so I think that's a really powerful way to look at this. Obviously, one question people are going to have as I'm listening to this, right, is like, okay, I'm paying that 40 basis points for quote unquote the management of this, and in the low cost diversified index world, the word management is like saying, hey, Justin, you're gonna punch me in the face, and I'm supposed to like it. And so, when I'm hearing you say that, like, who is managing this quote unquote separately managed account? And how does that process work for people that want to go into this? Is this just something that only you can have access to if you have an advisor, or is it something that the normal Joe Schmo who wants to participate in direct indexing can also take part in?
That's a good question. I am most familiar with the advisor-facing solutions. I understand that there are some retail options. A lot of these are like software platforms that are then implemented at the custodian level. And you may, for our listeners, custodian is just a bank that holds money for investment. Custodians bring products and services under their umbrella, and they offer these products and services to the clients, to the customers of the custodian. So Vanguard has done this. Schwab is doing this. Morgan Stanley has acquired Parametric. So there's this, like, these big money managers are either building their own SMA tech or they're acquiring companies that have done so. The solutions that I like best that I'm aware of are the ones accessible through an advisor. I think Fidelity has one that's like a pretty low minimum and that it is retail available. So frankly, this is the kind of thing, like, could you do it yourself? Probably. Should you? Maybe. I mean, I'm trying to be as charitable as possible to say maybe, like, probably not. It's kind of the way I feel about it. You're just going to create a mess that you're not going to know how to clean up. And then you're going to have to go to some advisor and have them clean it up for you, which, as somebody who's cleaned up a lot of messes, I mean, that's okay. But like, just save yourself the trouble and delegate this sort of luxury service of asset management and wealth management to a trusted professional. Obviously, I'm biased on that.
Yeah, well, and as listeners know, I don't use an advisor, and so I currently don't do direct indexing because it is more complicated, and that brings up one of the drawbacks to this is that it is complicated. And as someone who's huge on behavioral finance and psychology of money, like I can't help but look at this and like think of the jam experiment, and for those that aren't familiar, right? You got the two different displays in the same supermarket at the same time of the day, different displays are put up two different times. It's like their version of like a randomized control trial. And like one has like 6 choices. The other one has like 24, I think it was. And like, if you look at the sales numbers on those things, like the display of 6, less people came than the 24 because 24 draws more attention, but then significantly more people bought from the display of 6 than the 24 because people that came to the 24 couldn't make a decision, right? Analysis paralysis, right? Like they had all these options and they couldn't decide what to do. And so when I think about direct indexing, like that's like that on steroids in a lot of ways. And so if you don't have someone who is professionally helping you, I personally would honestly discourage you from taking this approach. And the reason why is because you're going to get all of this muck and mire and just mess that you've made like you described and not know what to do with it, and then you're just going to do nothing because people get stuck in analysis paralysis, which financially isn't great. I'd rather you have a very simple solution that you've decided to pursue, which is, in my opinion, one of the benefits of low cost diversified index strategies. It's just so simple and you can just ignore it. It's not something you're going to get myopic loss aversion, take a closer look at, see it go down, and then want to do something about it, right? Whereas direct indexing brings in all of those behavioral and psychological problems, potential problems. And I think that those problems without an advisor don't make a lot of sense to me. I think people will probably cause more harm than good.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I would say if you are committed to the DIY path, this is one of those, like, it's a thing that is an example of something you should probably just leave on the shelf, to go back to your jam example and say, like, there's other more sophisticated, fancy things that we could do that would probably be accretive to your wealth building. But you're probably still going to be fine if you're like saving a high percentage of your income, doing the ETF thing, living beneath your means, call it a day. And that's, Jimmy, you and I have talked about the stress adjusted return. Like, that's probably the best way to get your stress adjusted return, and you can probably be fine. But if you are, I mean, for me as an advisor who's looking for ways to do the best thing I reasonably, replicably, scalably can, this is an important tool in the toolbox and something that clients do find a lot of value in. And that as we can administer these programs and facilitate the gifting and, manage some of the tax complexity, it's awesome. And I'm very excited to be able to use tools like this.
Yeah, like I said, you're a fan. You're a fan of the potential of the tool for the right person. And so I think that brings into question, right? So like, who is the right person? Let's say that somebody's employed a financial advisor, because we've kind of established that that's probably a wise decision if you're going to employ this approach. And I will say, not being a financial advisor, that this is potentially one of the reasons you could justify having one because of all the benefits that we're describing. In this situation, you might say, hey, this is one of the benefits I'd get from, using an advisor like Justin, who's familiar with direct indexing, or SMAs, as you like to call them, and can help me, employ this approach. But let's say that you have a client. It sounds like, based on what you're saying earlier, that this isn't right for everybody. And so who is this right for, and who is it not?
Prime candidate is somebody who is high income, probably approaching the highest marginal tax bracket, if not in the highest tax bracket, adding cash ongoing. That's ideal. It's not necessary, but it's ideal
To their brokerage account.
to the brokerage account, and they're saving enough money to be saving into that. If you think about the hierarchy, you fill up the tax advantage stuff, you do your 401k, 403b, 457, you do your backdoors, you pay off all your debt, and then you've got this taxable bucket. Ideally, you're putting six figures into that taxable bucket every year. So if you've got $500,000, $1 million or more in that taxable bucket, and this is when you start asking the questions about, oh, should I do that, esoteric, opaque thing? This is the great thing about direct indexing. It's totally liquid. It's totally transparent. You can look at your statement, know exactly what you're holding. If you want to sell everything tomorrow and turn it into cash, you can. So it's in a totally different category from those, closed end, limited partnership types of things. And if you're charitably inclined, that's kind of icing on the cake. Another icing on the cake item is if you are a business owner, you've got a surgery center, a medical practice, you've got a portfolio of real estate, rental real estate, and there may be capital gains in your future. This is a way to sort of turbocharge the capital loss realization. So you build up that capital loss carry forward with a tool like this, so that when you sell that medical practice, when you sell that surgery center, when you have that big liquidity event and you get all those capital gains incurred, you have banked a ton of losses in the meantime, and those will offset that future capital gain. So that is the sort of the ideal candidate. And then if you have one or two of those, 4 or 5 characteristics, it can still pay for itself in many cases.
I said this before, it doesn't get enough airtime, and I don't think people understand this, right? They think about tax loss harvesting and they're like, oh, I've got my $9,000, so I'm going to take $3,000 and count it against my ordinary income tax for the next 3 years. And they don't realize that actually that $9,000 could turn into, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, and that instead of taking that $3,000, every year for 10 years for that 30 grand, you could have a single event like selling a center, right, where you are supposed to pay $30,000 in capital, taxes, capital gains taxes, and then that's going to be offset by the $30,000 that you've been harvesting over the last 10 years. And so, maybe the numbers aren't exactly the great example there, because you would use the $3,000 every year to offset your income. But let's say it was 60 and use 30 to offset your income. You have an extra 30 that you could put towards a capital gains event that can be used at one time. And I don't think people talk about that enough, which for practice owners and people that are in real estate, like if you're the person that's listening to this and you're like, oh, I do own a practice, this is just one of the multitude of examples of ways that you could be saving quite a bit of money by working with somebody that knows what they're doing, which goes back to that return on investment. And one other thing I'll add, Justin, is, and this is how it got pitched to attend. It was like direct indexing. And not only can you direct index, you can also pick an ESG portfolio that, recommends based on your political views, or what have you, your environmental social governance views. And we did an episode on ESG investing in February of 2024. So if you're listening to this, you can go check that back out. Nutshell, I'm not a huge fan of ESG investing for a variety of reasons, but like this is one slant that people will be like, well, hey, if you direct index, that S&P 500 can become the S&P 447, and you can drop the 53 companies that you don't like because you think that so-and-so is a crazy CEO, right? So it does allow for that if ESG investing is your thing and you just refuse to invest in companies through a broad, diversified index fund strategy. And there's just some company out there that you just fundamentally cannot put any money towards because you just vehemently disagree with it. This is one way you could still index in a way and get rid of those companies.
Yeah. And for the advisor facing tools, we have the ability to exclude by company, by industry, and there's a number of different sort of subsets to build our own sort of ESG type of approach, which I feel the same way that you do, Jimmy. Like I don't by default recommend that, but I do have clients that are interested in it, and we do it for them, and it works quite elegantly. So that's a cool feature that allows you to systematically partition out certain companies.
Yep. So hopefully you've listened to this show, you've learned about separately managed accounts or direct indexing, and what the strategies are, how it's beneficial, and how it may or may not fit your situation, depending on who you are. And hopefully you've been able to determine if this is the right thing for you. And if not, dig into it more, learn about it. Reach out to Justin or me if you want to discuss it more. Always happy to do that. Before you head out, don't forget, you can get your free copy of the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance. You're listening to this, you may already have it at moneymeetsmedicine.com. Please send it to all of your friends, particularly those that are in training and residency, fellowship, and early career attendings. I think it's most helpful for them. And also, if you need help with disability insurance, you can do that at moneymeetsmedicine.com as well. All right, everybody, we will see you next week. Cheers. Justin Harvey is a certified financial planner at APM Wealth, where he helps anesthesiologists and pain medicine physicians. Dr. Jimmy Turner is a practicing academic anesthesiologist at Wake Forest in North Carolina. He's also a licensed insurance agent. However, either Justin or Jimmy are your financial planner, investment advisor, or insurance agent. This show is expressly for general education and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should be considered financial advice. All views expressed are solely the views of the guests on the show and do not represent the views or opinions of their employer.